On the morning of the 20th of June, Didier Deschamps received news that no match, no trophy, and no tournament can prepare a person for. His mother had passed away. And in the hours that followed, as the French Football Federation gathered itself around its manager, as players and staff absorbed the grief of the man who had led their country to a World Cup title and who was now flying home from North America to be with his family, the Federation made a request to FIFA. It was a small request, one of the smallest gestures in football's vocabulary of respect. They asked whether France's players could wear black armbands in their next match against Norway as a mark of dignity and honor for the mother of their absent coach. FIFA said no. The refusal was explained. The pre-match tribute slot for that evening had already been reserved for the victims of the devastating earthquake in Venezuela. There was no room for an additional tribute. The rules around official mourning gestures at FIFA competitions are specific and require advance authorization, and the authorization for this particular loss was declined. France's players walked out against Norway without armbands. The minute's silence that the Federation had initially announced to journalists for Deschamps' mother was corrected before it happened. FIFA clarified that the silence was for Venezuela. And in the space of a few hours, one of the most respected figures in football's recent history was in the air heading home to grieve, while his team played on beneath a decision that left the football world struggling to find the words. And then, on the 11th of July, in the hours before Argentina's quarterfinal against Switzerland in Kansas City, the Argentine Football Association filed a request with FIFA. Antonio Ubaldo Ratin, one of Argentina's most iconic footballers, had passed away that morning at the age of 89 after a suspected stroke. A Boca Juniors legend, Argentine captain, and one of the most consequential figures in the entire history of the sport's rules and regulations, he had died on the very day his nation was playing a World Cup quarterfinal. The Argentine Football Association asked FIFA for permission to wear black armbands throughout the match. FIFA approved the request. Argentina's players and coaching staff walked onto the pitch against Switzerland with black armbands on their sleeves. A pre-match tribute was held that honored both Ratin and South African international Jaden Adams, and on one of football's greatest stages, the reigning world champions paid their respects to a man whose legacy is woven into the fabric of the modern game. France's federation, reading about what happened in Kansas City, immediately sought clarification, and the clarification they received from FIFA, whatever its technical precision, has produced a reaction from the football world that no technical explanation has yet been able to fully absorb. The same governing body, the same tournament, the same category of request, one denied, one approved. And the question that the French Football Federation and millions of supporters watching around the world cannot let rest is devastatingly simple. Why? To answer that question fairly, the distinction FIFA would draw between the two situations must be stated honestly. Black armbands at FIFA competitions are typically granted for significant figures in the sport itself or for victims of large-scale tragedies. Ratin was not simply a private individual connected to Argentina through family. He was a football legend whose career contributed directly to some of the most enduring innovations in the sport's rules. His controversial sending off in the 1966 World Cup quarterfinal against England in Wembley by German referee Rudolf Kreitlein in a match Argentina had always felt was governed unfairly on English soil became the incident that forced FIFA to act. The confusion and chaos that followed his refusal to leave the pitch, his act of sitting on a red carpet reserved for the Queen of England, his crumpling of a corner flag pennant, made international football recognize that it needed a universal disciplinary language that required no translation. The yellow card and the red card were introduced for the 1970 World Cup in Mexico. Every caution shown at every level of football in every country on earth for the past 55 years carries somewhere in its lineage the ghost of what happened in that Wembley quarterfinal.
Ratin did not simply play football. He changed it, and FIFA, on the morning of his death, granted the tribute that his status in the sport's history justified. But here is where FIFA's distinction, logical as it is in isolation, becomes impossible to maintain without discomfort in the context of the broader pattern this tournament has established. Because the French Football Federation's request was not made for a private individual with no connection to the sport. It was made for the mother of the man who has managed France's national team for 14 years, the man who, as a player, captained France to their first World Cup title in 1998, the man who, as a coach, delivered their second in 2018. A figure so central to French football's greatest era that his personal grief on the morning of a tournament match was not simply a private matter, it was something his players carried onto that pitch against Norway, something that sat in the dressing room, in the warm-up, in every minute of a match his assistant had to manage in his absence. The Federation asked for armbands. Not a trophy, not a special ceremony, not an extended tribute, a strip of black fabric worn on a sleeve for 90 minutes, as an acknowledgement, from football to one of its most distinguished servants, that his loss was seen and that the sport he has given so much of his life to recognized the weight of what he was carrying. And FIFA said no. FIFA fan reactions online captured the feeling precisely. One supporter wrote that respect should never be controversial and that compassion and football can coexist. Another described FIFA blocking a black armband for a coach's mother as petty even by FIFA's standards. A third asked why FIFA always has double standards like this, whether they have any sense of humanity at all. Those are the words of football supporters who have been watching this governing body navigate one controversy after another across 6 weeks of a tournament that was supposed to be its greatest achievement. Words from people whose patience with institutional explanations has worn thin across weeks of disputed VAR decisions, reversed disciplinary rulings, formal complaints, parliamentary investigations, and statements from Pierluigi Collina that address different questions to the ones being asked. And into that atmosphere, the armband story arrived with a particular kind of devastation, because unlike a VAR review, unlike a penalty appeal, unlike a simulation red card, this was not a footballing decision, it was a human one. It required no technology, no slow-motion replay, no expert panel. It required only the recognition that a man who has given 14 years of his life to football at its highest level was absent from his team's match because his mother had died that morning. The miscommunication that accompanied the denial made everything sharper. The French Federation, before FIFA intervened, told journalists that a minute's silence would be held for Deschamps' mother ahead of the Norway match. FIFA then clarified that the silence was actually for Venezuela earthquake victims. The Federation had to issue a public correction within minutes of its own announcement. On an already painful morning, in front of the football press assembled for a World Cup group stage match, France's officials had to publicly retract a statement about their own coach's mother. The institutional embarrassment of that moment, entirely preventable, entirely unnecessary, speaks to something beyond the specific decision about armbands. It speaks to how FIFA communicates with the federations it governs, and it speaks to the relationship between the sport's ruling body and the people, nations, and families caught up in the machinery of its operation.
There is also a dimension to this story that reaches beyond the immediate comparison between France and Argentina. One of the additional elements of the pre-match tribute at Argentina's quarterfinal was a commemoration of South African international Jaden Adams, a young player whose passing earlier in 2026 had been mourned across the football world. His death was a tragedy of a different kind entirely, and FIFA, in that tribute, was performing exactly the function a governing body should perform, honoring those lost, acknowledging grief, showing the sport's capacity for humanity. All of which makes the denial of France's request not easier to understand, but harder. Because if FIFA can find the humanity to honor Jaden Adams, if it can approve armbands for Ratin within hours of his death on the morning of a quarterfinal, if it holds pre-match silences for earthquake victims with dignity and appropriate solemnity, then the question of why a strip of black fabric on the sleeves of French players was too much to accommodate for the mother of the man who has managed them for 14 years does not resolve itself with a rulebook reference. It remains, like all the other questions this tournament has generated, unanswered, adding its weight to an accumulating record of decisions that individually carry explanations that FIFA would insist are technically sound, and collectively create a portrait of an institution that appears to the millions watching to apply its own standards with something less than perfect consistency. France have now formally requested that FIFA review the decision and its implications. Their challenge is not framed as a demand for retrospective armbands. It is framed as a question about the framework itself, about whether the criteria for granting or denying such requests are clear, consistent, and communicated to federations in a way that allows them to understand what to expect. It is the most measured of the formal challenges this tournament has produced. It carries none of the heat of Egypt's complaint naming a referee, none of the legal precision of Belgium's appeal against a suspended red card. It is simply a federation asking a governing body to explain itself. And in a tournament where that request has become the defining rhythm of events off the pitch, the fact that France has now joined the chorus of nations seeking answers from FIFA tells its own story. Didier Deschamps will lead his country in the semifinal. He has returned from grief to the dugout. He will face Spain, and he will do what he has always done for French football, give everything he has. His players will do the same. They carried their loss against Norway without armbands, and they won. They carried the memory of their manager's absence, and they found a way through. But the question of why they had to carry it without the smallest visible symbol of respect that football has available to offer, while weeks later the same governing body granted exactly that symbol to another nation within hours of a similar request, is a question that Didier Deschamps and everyone who respects what he represents in this sport deserves to have answered. And FIFA, as this tournament approaches its climax, is running out of time to provide answers that match the seriousness of the questions being asked.